welcome Professor Stan Gilmore to... So I'm delighted to welcome Professor Stan Gilmore to the stage to deliver the James Smart Memorial Lecture. We're honoured at CIPR to be trusted to deliver the James Smart Annual Lectures on behalf of the James Smart Memorial Trust. There's more information about the history of the James Smart Lecture, but I won't go into that because I know Stan's going to touch on it in his talk. But really, the ethos of the James Smart Lecture fits with the ethos of CIPR about bringing research, evidence, and policy and practitioners together to really collaborate and share dialogue, and that's what today's about. That's what the James Smart Memorial Lectures are about, and that is what Stan is about. So Stan, bibliography is in the programme, so I won't go into too much detail, but he's a professor of practice at Keele University. He has a long career in policing, in many varied roles within policing, but also as director of the Thames Valley Police Violence Reduction Unit. He's done a lot of work around data, which, picking up on the point made by Martin Evans, and our continued shared frustrations around accessibility and sharing of data, and its importance to prevention and collaborative working, then it's extremely important and useful to have Stan here to give us this lecture. So over to you, Stan.
Thank you. Let's get this up and running. Just while I'm doing this, just for the avoidance of doubt, if anyone's taking photographs, I'm Stan Gilmore and that's the Christmas tree. Right. Here we go. Well, thanks Professor Liz Aston, thanks to Professor Leslie McMillan and to the Scottish Institute for Policing Research for inviting me here to speak to you all today. The theme of the conference, that we've heard many times, is community wellbeing and safety, building partnerships in policing, and through this lecture I intend to examine this theme in the context of a move towards what you've heard today, often referred to as taking a public health approach in policing. And I'll have a specific focus on data collaboration. So this is a tale of my personal journey as much as anything else, and I hope that my experiences are going to be of some use to you. This lecture really is a story of my focus on the police contribution to what you've heard already, a whole systems approach to change. Now, a colleague suggested that this required a strategic balancing act between Marvin Gaye's What's Going On and Lenin's What Is To Be Done, so wish me luck on that. From my perspective then, what's going on in the future of policing is all set to be influenced by a blend of evolving societal demands, technological advancements and shifts in policing strategies. Several key trends and areas of focus are poised to shape the path forward for policing. First, police science and technology developments and their integration will play a central role, with police forces working in cross-sectoral partnerships and adopting advanced technologies like artificial intelligence to bolster crime prevention, investigation, enforcement, detection and wider public safety efforts. Secondly, data-driven policing will become more prevalent, harnessing collaborated data and using academic research and the power of advanced analytics to inform ethical strategies, identify missing data, and allocate resources and reduce harm. Third, there will be a continued focus on community policing, we've heard that already, and trust building, again, we've heard that. Emphasising positive relationships and collaboration with local communities to identify the causes of public safety problems and address their specific needs together. Fourth, policing will involve specialist training for trauma, crisis intervention, mental health responses, ensuring officers are equipped to handle individuals with a history of abuse, neurodisability and mental health challenges, employing appropriate approaches and de-escalation techniques. Fifth, police will focus on increasing diversity amongst their ranks and addressing issues related to bias, discrimination and social justice concerns. Additionally, there will be a greater emphasis on forming partnerships with other agencies to address the root causes of criminalisation and linked public safety challenges. The police will work together with social care, education, housing, health and grassroots community organisations to reduce risk and improve protection. Sixth, tackling transnational organised crime, counter-terrorism efforts and enhancing cyber security capabilities will continue to be at the forefront of challenges presented by criminal gangs, extremists, state actors and the impact of climate crises. There will be a constantly growing demand for transparency and accountability within policing, with governance frameworks and citizen oversight continuing to gain importance against a backdrop of challenges to operational independence. Continuous training and professional development for officers and staff will be crucial to ensure they remain equipped with the latest skills, knowledge and technical literacy. This includes a focus on ensuring core skills and resources for investigation and safeguarding are suitably prioritised. Policing models will become more adaptive, allowing for quick adjustments in multi-agency responses to emerging threats and changing community needs, and a shift towards proactive crime prevention through social programmes will be a focal point. And finally, legislative reforms may impact policing practices, with changes in areas such as use of force policies, information sharing, police governance and wider criminal justice reform. These trends collectively underscore the need for the police to remain flexible and responsive to evolving dynamics and for them to work as part of a whole systems, whole of society approach to community well-being and safety. The solutions to many of these areas of focus are to be found outside of the police system. I intend to spend some time at the end of this lecture talking about what's to be done and highlight some short case studies to examine hidden data, the need for curiosity and the power of data collaboration for community well-being and safety. But let me first acknowledge what brings us here today to a lecture in memory of Chief Constable James Smart. James Smart was the first Chief Constable of Glasgow Police and took up office with his establishment of 400 policemen in 1862 and held it until his death in 1870. Now, it's worth noting that I think Glasgow now has about 2,500 women and men distributed to them through the settlement. In the preamble to the very first James Smart Memorial Lecture, he was acknowledged as a shrewd, far-seeing man, firm and decisive in his actions, who secured the confidence of the authorities and throughout his career set an example which earned him the respect and esteem of all. The James Smart Memorial Lectures were established at the request by James's grandson, Lewis Smart, to promote the widening and deepening of police thought. And I think we're all living up to that today, and I hope I can live up to that as well. Smart's tenure in policing may seem a very long time ago, and in actual terms I guess it was. But I'm interested in the things that may connect us to Smart's time, rather than those things that may divide us. On a personal note, my own grandfather was born just a few years after James Smart's passing. It's hard to believe that in the year of my grandfather's birth, Disraeli was Prime Minister, Victoria was Queen and Empress, and Ulysses S. Grant was visiting Scotland. He was on a trip to improve his ratings by leaning on his Scots heritage during his re-election bid for Republican President of the USA. Don't worry, it didn't work. So people pass and time passes, and we can reflect on what the passage of time and the impact of change makers in those times means for our practice development today. And there are some continuities worthy of note and examination. James Smart was a police superintendent and was created Chief Constable with the passing of the Glasgow Police Act in 1862. This allowed the title of Chief Constable to be used for the first time in Glasgow. Before that, it was a designation used in the county forces. So when I read the Act in preparation for this lecture, I was struck, and not for the first time, by a familiar note from the past. The Act created the position of Chief Constable, but it also created the position of the Medical Officer of Health, whose role it was to present to the Board of Police the measures which he recommends for the removal or prevention of disease in Glasgow. Early attempts to control disease in Glasgow emanated not from public health legislation, but from the police acts of the time. The board therefore had responsibility for police and public health partnerships, for the safety and the well-being of its communities. A significant continuity, I'd suggest, with today's efforts in multi-agency collaboration using public health approaches for prevention. So when I talk about public health approaches used in policing, I take a steer from the World Health Organization's public health approach to reducing violence through multi-agency partnerships. This tries to determine the common risk and protective factors for violence and encourages agencies to work together to find solutions. And according to the US SAMHSA, risk factors are characteristics at the biological, psychological, family, community or cultural level that precede and are associated with a higher likelihood of negative outcomes. Now I'll stress they're not deterministic, although research shows that they are probabilistic factors. So risk factors don't indicate that you'll cause or suffer harm, but they do make it more probable. Protective factors are characteristics associated with a lower likelihood of negative outcomes, or that reduce a risk factor's impact. Protective factors may be seen as positive countering events. Some risk and protective factors are fixed. They don't change over time. Other risk and protective factors are considered variable and can change over time. And variable risk factors, you've heard about some of them today, include income level, peer group, adverse childhood experiences, cases, and employment status. Now we can use public health methodology to promote community well-being and safety by identifying and examining the constituent underlying problems. And this approach has got 4 stages. First off, surveillance. We need to define the problem and come up with possible solutions through collecting and analysing a wide range of information and data from across our systems about the issues affecting our communities. Then identify risk and protective factors, so use this research and the technology that you have available to look at the causes of problems. I say research and not evidence, for the same reason that you heard earlier. We want to identify the prevalence and where preventive interventions could be most effective in solutions, and critically where investment are likely to be ineffective or counterproductive. And I note here that most data are male data. So please record and analyse sex disaggregated data and use research output to identify how risk factors operate differently for girls and women than they do for boys and men. I'll return to this. Develop and evaluate interventions. Find out what works and crucially what doesn't work to solve problems by sitting down with people with lived experience and wider systems partners to design, commission, implement and evaluate solutions. Don't discount enforcement and situational prevention measures as part of the suite of interventions. Good policing can have an important positive effect and is often discounted when we think about public health approaches as being only about early intervention with partnerships. Now implement your solutions together. Monitor the effects of your interventions on your systems and on risk factors and on protective factors, and evaluate their impact and cost effectiveness. These stages operate, or at least should operate, simultaneously in 3 crime prevention domains, and these were set out back in 1976 by Brantingham and Faust as primary prevention, directed at modification of criminogenic conditions in the physical and social environment at large. Secondary prevention, directed at early identification and intervention in the lives of individuals or groups in criminogenic circumstances. And 3, tertiary prevention, directed at the prevention of recidivism or recriminalisation. These are sometimes referred to as universal, targeted and specialised prevention, and lend themselves across the life course, from early years universal offerings through to specialised integrated offender management in later adulthood. James Smart's Board of Police had oversight of policing and of public health, as I've said. It's abundantly clear from reading reports from the time that their leaders used wise discretion in the exercise of their powers. Smart's public health contemporary, the medical officer for health, Dr. Gardner, was as keen as Smart to show reserve when dealing with potential solutions to the problems experienced by, as he put it, the dangerous classes. Both sought restraint from excessive enforcement as prevention, acknowledging that it was only likely to make matters worse, and looked instead at how to work together to create sustainable solutions, albeit in the beginning not necessarily for the benefit of those experiencing disadvantage, but for those disadvantaged by their proximity to them. That's a common theme even now, especially when we think of the current political rhetoric surrounding migration, substance misuse and homelessness. Now, 50 years on from Smart's passing, and my mother was born in Glasgow, and when she was born, it's interesting to me certainly that women didn't have the vote, at least all women didn't have the vote in my mother's lifetime, not that long ago at all, it seems to me. And interesting again that the first parliamentary debate on women's suffrage was led by John Stuart Mill during Smart's tenure as chief. Amazing how much changes in just from my grandfather's time to mine. Now, that remains a problem. Issues of disadvantage, the impact of intersectional disadvantage, and our appreciation of it, our ability to deliver against it. Fast forward then another 50 years, a mere 100 years after Smart, and we enter the 1970s. A decade characterised by rapid civic, social and technological upheavals. And by now I'm around, and I well remember the decade from its transition from the say-nothing pop of the Bay City Rollers to the Jan's Eton Rifles and its war against apathy. Now, personally, I was always more of a mod than a rocker, little did I know back then, though, that my police career would take me down into the heart of many a row going on down near Slough. In today's fast-paced, ever-changing world, we often find ourselves grappling with the deep sense of disconnection, of alienation that Paul Weller summed up so well. Alienation is a feeling that seems to pervade our lives and can be traced back to various factors in society. But I like to draw your attention here to the words of another James Reid, spoken during his 1972 rectoral address to the University of Glasgow. His words remain remarkably relevant today. Alienation is the frustration of ordinary people excluded from the process of decision-making. The feeling of despair and hopelessness that pervades people who feel, with justification, that they have no real say in shaping or determining their own destinies. Reid, in his wisdom, recognised the issue of alienation, a pervasive sentiment of being disconnected from ourselves, each other, and our communities. This alienation stems from the rapid march of technology, the hustle and bustle of urban life, and the erosion of traditional social bonds. The rise of design thinking provides a solution to this through human-centred approaches to our relational problems. Because as we ponder the world around us, we see how technology has taken us to great heights, but it has also led to a sense of detachment. We can connect with someone on the other side of the globe in an instant, yet we may struggle to engage in a heartfelt conversation with our neighbour, or indeed our friends. Our screens have grown larger, but the distance between our hearts has, in some ways, become more profound. In the rush of urban existence, we find ourselves caught up in the relentless pursuit of success after success, leaving little time to nurture our relationships, passions, and most importantly, ourselves. The pace of life has left many of us feeling like strangers in our own lives, as if they're merely spectators, commentators, or influencers, rather than active participants in change. Moreover, the social fabric that once held us together, like tightly woven threads, has started to unravel. It's not always a bad thing, it can bring freedom, but the bonds of community and shared values have frayed. We become individuals adrift in a sea of constant change and populist self-promotion. But here's the point Reid was making back in 1972. Alienation is not inevitable, nor is it inescapable. We can choose to reverse this trend. We can choose to prioritise human-centric values, to reconnect with one another and to rebuild partnerships to improve resilience and the sense of community that we so desperately need. In our quest to combat alienation, we must rediscover the importance of meaningful human connections and relationships. We must create spaces and opportunities for genuine conversations, fostering empathy and understanding of the best ways to work together. We must slow down the relentless pace of our lives and savour the moments that truly matter. As Reid urged in his address, it's time to rebuild our communities, rekindle our sense of shared purpose, and remember that we are not alone in this journey. In doing so, I believe we can conquer the alienation that has plagued us, and working together, forge a brighter future through the power of collaboration. The 1970s was indeed a hotbed of social and political unrest, and perhaps unsurprisingly, it was also a duel of critical policing research. Sociologists, criminologists, lawyers, police officers and policymakers were ushering in the knowledge that underpins much of today's discussions on the power of collaboration. It's worth noting that the 1970s had two significant parentheses: the publication in 1969 of Hershey's theory of social control at one end, and the conservative law and order election victory of 1979 at the other. But in 1970, Bittner focused on and discussed the functions of police. In 1972, Lord Fraser gave the inaugural James Smart Memorial Lecture. Sir Robert Mark made the first speech by a police officer on national television, and Stan Cohen spoke of moral panics. In 1973, Paul Rock examined deviant behaviour. Ian Taylor and others espoused the new criminology, hitting out at social determinants and political choices. In 1974, George Kelling brought us the Kansas City Preventive Patrol Experiment, an early experiment in policing. And in 1975, Frieda Adler proposed a theory of women in crime that was a defining moment in criminological thinking. 1976, Grantham and Faust discussed the public health model. And in 1977, Shearing challenged the law and order debate by considering the police as a social service. We've touched on that. In 1978, Stuart Hall brought us Policing the Crisis, and Sir Robert Mark underlined the long-standing doctrine that operational freedom of the police from political or bureaucratic interference is essential to their acceptability and to the preservation of democracy. Their manifest impartiality is their most priceless asset. In 1979, Ronald Akers finished his social learning theory, and Morris Punch exposed the police as indeed the secret social service. And finally, Herman Goldstein offered us problem-oriented policing, building upon the critical thought processes of US policing pioneers, August Vollmer and Orlando Wilson. Each decade has its own story, of course, and I draw on the 70s, not because I'm stuck there. Rather, to identify the developments of thought in the 100 years after James Smart, and to illustrate where the output from that decade continues to contribute today, another 50 years on, to promote the widening and deepening of police thought. The research I've mentioned has provided us with the platform for our evidence-based or research-based approaches, and the 5 decades of intervening research and innovation has helped shape our strategies. It's important, I think, to mention that, because we really do need to understand that we're ploughing a fertile field here and not simply scratching around for insight. We're building upon research and thinking that's decades old, and sometimes people look at me and think, well, this is innovation. Most of it's not. It's already there for us to reach to. But I'll explain how pulling on these threads has helped me to develop my own thinking as I began to understand the building blocks that were needed to support my attempts in creating strong collaborative partnerships and promoting whole systems change. It's worth pausing here and noting that despite this vibrancy of research into policing in the 70s, John Alderson, who in 1973 as Commandant of the National Police College commented, "Police progress in this country has been marked by the national predilection for consensus. The discussions of innumerable committees at many levels, the compromises which so discourage the idealist and the radical, have no doubt slowed down the pace of change within the cells. Whatever its administrative disadvantages, this has had the effect of keeping police reform within the bounds of what the public and police themselves feel to be acceptable. So let's take a turn then, a turn to the radical, towards the disruptive, and towards what Campbell Christie underlined in his seminal review of public services in Scotland, and have a look at collaborative prevention. Charlie Taylor, when chair of the Youth Justice Board, made the following comment on prevention and the complexities it involves. In this instance, to reduce violence, but the underlying premise is the same for all preventive efforts. When you look at how Glasgow has used the public health approach, there's an enforcement angle. No one is denying that, but it's also about having services working together and collaborating and sharing information so that children and families get the support they need. This is indeed why we collaborate, simply because we do not have the information, knowledge, power, capabilities or resources to achieve our goals without the help of people and organisations in other sectors. These collaborations are often referred to as quadruple helix collaborations. Fancy term, but what it means is you need at least 4 components working together. Government bodies, the tech industry, universities and civil society, all working together as partners in innovation. We live in interesting times. They're often called volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous times. And navigating this demands innovative solutions to bolster community resilience. It's clear to me that data collaboration can be a game changer in taming this environment. And we can do this through shared insights. Collaboration on data enables a comprehensive single view of the landscape, helping teams anticipate and respond to volatile situations through a joint response strategy. It assists agile decision-making. Rapid, informed decisions are crucial. Collaborative data analysis enables agile decision-making, adapting strategies in real time, using up-to-date intelligence. Timeliness is a crucial limb of data ethics and data ethics maturity. And data ethics is different from general policing ethics. And I would just encourage everyone to have a look at what data ethics is as a separate topic, because it's not about behaviour, it's about technology. By pooling data resources, we can mitigate risk, and teams can identify and address potential risk factors more effectively and build protective capacity, enhancing overall resilience and improving productivity. An interconnected intelligence through breaking silos, fostering interconnected intelligence across departments and between partners. This harmonised approach enhances understanding and cooperation and preparing interoperable response capabilities and boosts innovation. Combining diverse data sets sparks innovation and reduces bias. Collaborative efforts unlock new perspectives, driving creative solutions to complex challenges, adding the potential for AI to change how we process and access data for insight, and we open up a whole new world of potential. However, let's take a step back for a moment and look at what it takes to work with others, and begin with a simple definition of collaboration. Collaboration is the action of working with someone to produce something. It's deceptively simple. But there's a hidden complexity that so often undermines attempts at collaboration. This first definition is the definition that you hear. A matter for your head. And as collaboration is always all about relationships, and therefore all about how you feel, collaboration is also a matter for your heart. And although your head has no problem with collaboration and the action of working with someone to produce something, it's my experience that the second definition of collaboration is much more important because of the way it makes you feel. Let me give you an example. I often ask multi-agency audiences if we should collaborate more on data sharing. All agree that we should. It makes sense for smarter decisions and saves lives. I then say, okay, can I have your data? Get a similar reaction. At that point, all the circuit breakers kick in and the heart takes over from the head. And the second definition of collaboration becomes the default. Collaboration, by this definition, becomes traitorous cooperation with an enemy. We all know what happens to collaborators, don't we? But here's the point. It's not the misuse of data that's the villain here. It's the misuse of data. When we fail to share information, we breed inefficiency and we feed vulnerability. We embed bias and provoke disproportionality. When I ask people why they don't want to share data, they tend to give reasons that sound to me like self-protection or protecting the reputation of their organisation, and that's not good enough. An organisation's data strategy needs to have 4 components: a reactive and a proactive data defence strategy, and a reactive and proactive data offence strategy. Most data strategies I've seen are limited to a proactive data defence strategy, put simply, a data protection strategy. The equivalent of a one-leg table, and just as should we. When a practice review puts it under the spotlight, still lessons will be learned, seems to cover off any and all failures. Time and again, lessons are learned more often than knowledge from those lessons is put towards the implementation of solutions. The Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO, has given some clear guidance on sharing information. And here from their 10-step guide to sharing information to safeguard children. Data protection law allows you to share information when required to identify children at risk of harm and to safeguard them from harm. Data protection law doesn't prevent you from doing this. It simply helps you to share information in a fair, proportionate and lawful way. It can be more harmful not to share information that is needed to protect a child or young person. Appropriate information sharing is central to effective safeguarding for children, to effectively safeguard children from harm and promoting their well-being. There have been many reviews of cases where children have died or been seriously harmed through abuse or neglect. The case reviews frequently identify gaps in information sharing as a factor contributing to failures to protect the children involved. Data protection law has an enabling role, supporting you to share information. Now, it's my experience, it's more likely that information will be shared to safeguard people from further harm, rather than to identify a risk of harm. And I had a discussion earlier with someone in the room, because how do you know when people are at risk? Unless you're sharing information. And I'm pleased that the ICO notes this, and deficit in a siloed organisational view, where the risk may not be obvious to a single person or organisation. We need to harness collaborated data to tell us when someone is at risk, not wait until their suffering reaches a peak that is high enough for our systems to take notice. This is especially true for the polyvictimisation of girls exposed to male violence, and for those whose risk behaviours are filtered by neurodisability. I'll come back to these 2 specific points in a moment. So in summary, I've drawn the threads of knowledge that have been made available to me by researchers and practitioners alike to mobilise people and create the building blocks for the capacity needed to shift systems into greater collaboration. So what's to be done? I'll turn to 2 short case studies to illustrate why we should adopt a data collaboration approach. The topic of serious violence, specifically violence affecting young people in public places, drew significant attention in 2017-18. But as background, interpersonal violence was already acknowledged as a long-standing global priority by the World Health Organization, albeit there had been scant progress in the UK on its recommendations for prevention outside of Scotland, where a radical approach to prevention had taken root inside the Glasgow Violence Reduction Unit, now the Scottish VR. The UK government acted upon the increased public awareness, and the Home Office Serious Violence Strategy of 2018 began to spell out their response. The strategy encourages collaboration between police and public health organisations and sets out a list of personal risk factors for violence drawn from decades of research. And these include, but are not limited to, child abuse and neglect, ACEs, impulsivity, i.e. low self-control, low intelligence, substance use, previous convictions, low self-esteem, gang membership and head injury, and I think they probably mean brain injury there. These are also pretty much a list of all the risk factors associated with the wider criminal justice system. With impulsivity and its derivatives being about the most widely researched topic in criminology. I often ask police officers what they really do about impulsivity. You don't tend to stand around too long to answer it. That was a joke. The Home Office adopted the Glasgow Scottish model for prevention and funded violence reduction units. These were multi-agency partnerships for prevention across England, and I was appointed as the director of one of these new regional organisations. My role was given clarity in the UK Home Office guidance, and I was to provide leadership and strategic coordination of all relevant agencies to reduce serious violence, with a focus on public health approaches in prevention to produce whole systems change. As the policing minister put it at the time, when you move on, they need to carry on. This is not about supporting the system, this is about building capacity and embedding systems change. Now, a lot of this had a focus on vulnerability, and in my view, people are vulnerable when they're excluded from the services or support they need to keep themselves or their families safe. Vulnerability is a systemic issue, and we should be careful not to blame people for their circumstances, even if it is just identifying them as vulnerable. This is a starting point for investigating why they're vulnerable and not the end of our curiosity. To understand this, I had to identify what problems I was going to tackle, and I choose a couple of areas where the risk factors seem to collide most significantly in the wide research on the epidemiology of harm and on the gap in understanding how risk factors operate for different groups and across systems. I'm just as interested in what violence does as I am what violence is. And this is boiled down to a focus on specific areas of need, and two of those I'll cover off now. They are neurodisability and criminal justice, and the poly-victimisation of girls. I mentioned these earlier. Well, why? When I started to try and understand what I could do about the risk factors mentioned in the 2018 strategy, and to look for the data to identify the prevalence of those risk factors in my region, it became clear that there were certain cohorts who were much more affected than others, and this raised questions relevant to preventive effort. We needed the data for problem solving and to measure any success in prevention so we could invest in the things that worked. For example, there's a significantly higher prevalence of neurodisabilities amongst those in contact with justice than in the general population. And girls and women are especially affected, especially with their generally more complex histories of exploitation and abuse that we've heard of today. When we tried to track down some of this data, we found that there was a real paucity of data. Very little collected on neurodisability, and the habitual focus on majorities. And people often say 70% of the offenders are young men, so when we look at factors that deal with young men, the 30% of women are just ignored, routinely ignored. When women are pulled in, they're pulled into solutions that are designed for the 70% of men. They're pulled into male solutions. And we often see their treatment options and punitive regimes that focus on them, leading to eventual equity, where women and girls are treated as if they're the same as boys and men, and we know they're categorically not. So this, together with perhaps a cultural blindness to female offenders, was leaving girls and women out of the picture almost entirely and left to their own devices. They were being let down and made vulnerable through their routinized exclusion and protection and diversion. So I look at neurodisability and neurodisabilities to include a wide range from ADHD, autism, dyslexia and traumatic brain injury, as well as other conditions, and their prevalence in those in contact with criminal justice. You're 5 times more likely to have a brain injury whilst under 5 years of age if you're in the poorest 5% of the population. Neurodisability is underdiagnosed in school-aged children, and this is especially so for those from the poorest families, who are more likely to be labelled as badly behaved than supported as children with special educational needs. and so begins the school-to-prison pipeline. 30% of young people in a secure state of learning difficulties compared to 3% in the general population. 50% of dyslexia compared to 10% of the general population. 70% of a brain injury compared to 25%. And 80% of a communication disorder against 5% of the general population. Neurodisability doesn't make someone a criminal, but it does make it more likely that they'll be criminalised. And perhaps this should be no surprise that criminal law punishes non-typical behaviours, and behaviour policies in schools are similarly punitive. What makes someone behave in a non-typical way? Well, impulsivity equals brain injury. Gang membership, brain injury. You're 2.5 times more likely to have a brain injury if you're a member of a gang. Head injury equals brain injury. ACEs also can equal brain injury. I've mentioned that earlier as well. Recent research, just in the last couple of weeks, indicates that being excluded from school is associated with contact with the criminal justice system at a younger age. And this association appears additive with multiple exclusions. And this is problematic as those who commit the first offence in childhood are more likely to re-offend. Each standard deviation increase in neurodisability was associated with being 6 months younger at first conviction. About 25% of women experience intimate partner violence, and around 75% of them will receive a brain injury. Around 80% of women in prison have a brain injury. And when we screen people coming into custody, 100% of women positively screened for a brain injury if they were coming in on the back of violence. So we need to get better at identifying these conditions and better at screening, especially in our custodies, and better at making accommodations throughout the criminal justice system. Some people ask me, well, how can the police do anything about that? Well, effective policing of domestic abuse. Non-fatal strangulation is a significant cause of brain injury. Tackling serious injuries on our roads, working with partners to prevent serious violence, all clear examples of how we can tackle brain injury and subsequently reduce a key individual factor for criminalisation. And these ends are all achievable if we have the data that identifies where prevention can be most effective. And for the polyvictimisation of girls, girls begin a lifetime of exposure to trauma, and they age through the criminal justice system, they pick up and build up more trauma. Twice as many women in prison report suffering ACEs compared to men in prison, and recent studies show that higher levels of self-harm in women, recent studies I'm talking about last week, reveal higher levels of self-harm in prison and experience of domestic abuse or child or adult sexual abuse as high as 80% from this cohort. Pippa Goodfellow, the Chief Executive of Alliance for Youth, quoted that, having been failed by numerous public services, young women report being trapped in a damaging cycle of abuse, inequality and offending. Young women are a minority within the criminal justice system on account of both their age and gender, leaving them overlooked and disregarded. We need to be pulling data together that help us further identify the risk factors that affect women and how they operate for women. But there's hope for the future, and there's many reasons to be hopeful. Whilst we acknowledge that the hard yard is still to be won before we win the hearts and minds of those in the best position to encourage organisations and communities to share data and work together. When we look at what's to be done, I believe that working together to see the whole picture of the risks and protective factors that are combined attention through a single view of data and information is a great place to start. The recent UK Home Office Policing Productivity Review is unequivocal about the need to strengthen the quality, availability and use of data to improve services, acknowledging that currently forces view data as broadly for their own local use. However, the more data is harmonised, the easier it will become for research and knowledge to be shared, with everyone benefiting from the increase in evidence, quality and insight. Enhancing police productivity can't pass first base without police data that's accessible, timely, lawfully obtained, ethical, properly managed, clean and used in a common and consistent way. For James Smart, this innovation and harmonisation was running a telegraph line between Police HQ and Fire HQ, and for us, it's much more complicated. But the technology is available. We can create, and we have created, a common data platform in the cloud using the technology that is currently ready available to all police forces. In fact, you might even be paying for it even if you're not using it. One of my roles currently is to help to build that capacity across UK policing. And the Information Commissioner Office has been dragging through our platform for the last year and has given it so far the green light. So we can get better at collaborating on data, we can get better at sharing data, and modern technology will help us to do that. But it's not a spectator sport. We all need to play our part. We need to step forward, share data, as they say, together as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. In the interest of time, we're going to skip the questions and answers. So if I can ask you to contact Stan directly if you have any questions for him or speak to him afterwards if he's still here. If I could invite the Chief Constable up to present the James Smart medal to Stan. Great. So